And Americans will see, and this is what's proven. I'll give you a mainstream example, Slumdog Millionaire. Every single studio passed on it. In the movie, one studio, Fox Searchlight, gave it a thumbs up. It made $350 million. Everyone's been singing J-Ho for the past 2 years, right? Why did it work? Interesting story, captivating characters. That's all that matters in the end of the day. And then people say, oh, look, that interesting character happens to be Muslim. The lead character was Muslim. That interesting story happened to be set in India. That interesting story happened to have brown people on it. So if you use the medium of culture, music, TV, video, which is the most influential medium that speaks globally. When I went to Turkey in 1998, people were wearing Titanic shirts, all right? And they listened to our music in Pakistan. People are quoting Simpsons, all right? People read novels and they cry. They cry because these characters in fiction novels, they resonate with them. So why can't a character who just happens to be brown and happens to be Muslim have the same effect on a global audience? And if you have these real stories, people will say, oh, that's an interesting story. He reminds me of my neighbor. She reminds me of my dentist. She reminds me of the student in my class who wears the hijab. Maybe not all of them are terrorists. Maybe not all of them are cab drivers. Maybe they're just like us.
Shahid, you're a grassroots organization. I wonder your approach. My own feeling, I think, shared with Wajahat, is that in order for people to care about Islamophobia, they have to realize it's not just a Muslim issue. What are your solutions for trying to get other people to care about this on the ground?
I mean, I think the first is that the issues that we're encountering as a community are actually, unfortunately, very similar to those of other communities. I mean, so presumptive marginalization and predatory prosecution and the infiltration of all our institutions, that might be a uniquely Muslim thing. But if you think in the abstract about the role of, say, information sharing on civil rights, the Latino community right now across the country is engaged in a struggle around the Secure Communities Program, which is an ICE program that basically pre-conviction, before anyone's actually ruled by a judge to have done anything wrong, can just be handed over by local police to ICE for summary deportation without any process at all. This is like destroying communities. It's vicious. And it's the same problem we have, right? Which is that it's law enforcement completely shorn from its public safety rationale, having been sort of turned by a nationalistic sensibility on particular vulnerable minorities. And there are elaborate conspiracy theories about those minorities and the way they're destroying the sort of like national, zeitgeist. I would wonder if that sounds familiar to anyone, right? And to place in a historical context what we're going through today in the United States against some other areas, where we've actually mobilized as a society to militarily defeat in the project to supposedly save the world. And I am talking about Germany in the 1930s. But there are very disturbing parallels. And I'm not going to say that there are going to be gas chambers for Muslims. I hope to God it never gets there. Summary roundups, yeah, we're about this far away, right? The Fourth Amendment, we already lost that 10 years ago. And here's the key, we all already lost that because the NSA and its warrantless wiretapping scheme, it doesn't differentiate, right? The FBI in the assertion of the authority to infiltrate a First Amendment protected group without evidence or suspicion of wrongdoing, they might be using that on us at the moment, but as people have described executive power before, it's a loaded gun lying around for some president to use it. And I would ask you, what happens if, let's just do a thought experiment. What happens if Sarah Palin wins the White House in 2012 with a preventive detention authority and a pervasive surveillance authority, and let's just say hypothetically a political inclination to use it in a way to marginalize her political opposition? I mean, we are talking about a risk structurally to democracy itself, and I think that's the message for me that resonates with other folks, right? I mean, because this is not a uniquely Muslim American problem. This is an insert here American problem. And we happen to be the canaries in the coal mine, right? Standing at the tip of the literal spear in this case. The one thing I would say, particularly just to pivot to a theme that Wajahat brought up, is that, and this is particularly to the Muslim Americans in the audience, we are each ambassadors collectively for the different things that we embody, right? So, I might be an ambassador for Muslim Americans. I might be an ambassador for 30-somethings to young people, right? I might be an ambassador of, hip-hop in the legal profession. Wajahat's an ambassador across these different communities that we circulate between, right? And so it is imperative now, in this political moment in particular, that we You'll hear about civic engagement. I'm not interested in civic engagement. I'm talking about civic leadership. We have to be engaged on the struggles that confront all Americans, right? We need Muslim Americans who are engaging very visibly in protecting the environment, in defending the rights of gays and lesbians, in addressing the crisis and the wealth disparity, right? We need to be engaging as Americans. And I think that there is certainly a crisis upon us, but in it, as always, is a great deal of opportunity. And I think the opportunity on the table to be visible leaders and representatives of ourselves and our communities, and it offers not only the opportunity to shift the way we're seen, but then also, you know, if we can inspire some folks to come with us to actually address some of those underlying problems. And I do think that they're absolutely fixable, however dark it might get.
We're going to have some Q&A from the audience, so I'd ask you guys to start thinking about some questions I want to turn to. I had in my mind a famous quote from Reverend Martin Niemöller in my head that you guys have probably heard, perhaps don't know the source. And the quote was, "First they came for the communists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak for me."
Could I jump in there just really quick? They came for the environmentalists a long time ago. The Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act in the late 90s made criminal what used to be constitutionally protected specifically for animal enterprises, right? And if you go to the prisons where counterterrorism defendants are held, 70% of them are Muslim, about 30% of them are environmentalists, so they already got it. We were next. Peace activists are coming online. You see that in the FBI stuff. Latinos have been there for a long time. So we're halfway through that litany. That is not a hypothetical future fear. This is a current reality that is upon us. So just to link the quote to sort of contemporarily what we're seeing.
So Corey, I was interested from CARE perspective, working with other faith groups. What has been your experience in getting other communities of faith to care and get involved in this particular issue?
We have to use this mic.
Oh, well, you can hold this one, actually. Here you go.
Thank you. I'm told this isn't being picked up by the camera.
I don't think is that being picked up? That's not even being picked up.
Is this one all right? There we go. Technology making our lives easier once again. You know, I believe strongly that one of the great things this country is built on is the faith community leading the charge. I mean, we're talking about Martin Luther King. Let's remember he was the Reverend Martin Luther King. And where you really saw this happening for American Muslims was during the entire Park 51 episode. There were a number of Jewish groups, Christian groups out front saying that the conversation, the idea of not allowing a minority faith in the United States to build a place of worship where they chose to do so was unacceptable. So speaking, and I always find this interesting as the guy who grew up in the majority culture, right, going back to the white thing, speaking now as a member of a minority, we are absolutely dependent upon our friends in the Christian community, in the Jewish community, and other faith groups. Without them, I mean, we really don't stand a chance. Look at the numbers. Immediately after September 11th, in November, they did a poll Pew did a poll on the favorability of Islam in the United States. 40% favorability rating. More recently in August, Pew did the same poll, 30% favorability rating. So that's 10 percentage points lost over the last 10 years, which I think, I mean, when I saw that number, really gave me pause for concern. Right. And what it says to me is we're not doing a great job of getting our message out. Now, we have allies in the interfaith community. And what we need to do is go beyond the interfaith community and start reaching into the right-wing community, the people that are willing to have conversations with us. And I think that's where, unfortunately, we've been uncomfortable. It's kind of nice to sit in a place where everybody's kind of perceived as liberal. It's easier. They're more accepting. I know when I go on Bill O'Reilly, I'm kind of, oh, God, here we go. And then, you know, it starts. But that's where we need to be, because we need to be having conversations that people on the right stop seeing this issue as Muslims because that's been one of our real mistakes. And then they start seeing it as Constitution, right? Bill of Rights being eroded. And the prime example that I can give you of how badly we're, of where we need to improve, Oklahoma passes a law recently banning what, Sharia law, what they consider something, very foreign and frightening, although it has more to do with how I pray, how I form my will, how I decide to get married, how I want to be buried. Banning that and international law being used in courts in Oklahoma. CARE files a lawsuit to stop that. Our arguments are all constitutionally based. All constitutionally based. And yet the hate mail that is flowing into us is incredible. And one would think, my God, we're defending the Constitution and we're being told that our children are going to be shot in the head. There's a problem there. And I think that problem really can be overcome by us doing stronger messaging through our interfaith partners and talking more about constitutional issues.
Fouad, one important power player in this whole conversation we haven't talked about yet is the role of the media and their efforts to either push back on or promote Islamophobia. Terry Jones' example was, I think, a powerful and pernicious one in which the media at first helped to propagate Mr. Jones, turned him from a marginal figure into one that had the international spotlight. The General Petraeus and a whole host of administration officials had to push back on. But I think ultimately the media felt shamed by the whole incident. We were talking about this beforehand, that many of them didn't even want to be down there in Gainesville, Florida, covering what they were covering, and at the end felt like they had not done a good job as reporters in that instance. And so I wonder your experience, or I guess what your critique of the media would be, and perhaps whether you see any hope for how the media covers this issue. So
I think the one thing that's important to think about Terry Jones is that mustache. I think that played a big factor. I mean, that was, Yosemite Sam, indeed. So I think that there's a problem in terms of the press, and I kind of hinted at it before. And one thing is to use a cultural argument for Islam and Muslims. So let me, I'm going to talk statistics for a very brief second. So when we think of statistics, we think of this thing called omitted variable bias, right? Omitted variable bias is the basic idea is whatever you're trying to analyze, if you keep something out of the equation that actually is explaining a lot of what's going on, your relationship is, whatever you're going to find is entirely problematic. So in this case, what happens with the media and Islam most of the time, Islam's always in the equation. But politics is somehow like exogenized, it's taken out, which seems preposterous. But, I tried to, before coming here, think of like a list of a couple things I could bring up. And of course I have like 3 pages of stuff. But I mean, a couple pretty clear examples of this. There was the story, I don't know if you remember, so unfortunately a lot of the things I might talk about no one's going to remember because it wasn't really covered particularly well, even though it should have been. There was the story of the Iraqi family who refused to take Blackwater's money. Blackwater, or Z, I guess, whatever they want to call themselves. They ended up killing the family's son, and they tried to offer them money. So the argument, the New York Times. The LA Times talks about this idea of, well, but there's this Arab honor, and that's why they didn't accept it. And then in Afghanistan, there's the Afghani culture, this Muslim culture of hostility to foreigners regarding their protests, regarding the nighttime raids that were going on, the detentions that were going on. Which is kind of insane because, so the Iraq case, I don't know. They may not want to accept blood money. I mean, I think, their son was killed. They don't want money for that. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. So the fact that there's a cultural argument there makes no sense to me, other than to paint things in a cultural landscape by exogenizing the politics. I can't imagine why someone would want to protest nighttime raids that are based on faulty information that kill lots of civilians. I don't know. I can't imagine why people would protest illegal detentions of people going on without trials in Afghanistan. It makes no sense. It must be the culture, right? This is something that's happened a lot. Park 51, this was a huge thing. I think part of what's happened actually, especially after 9/11, is that the accepted racism, as I've always called it, right? So what happens is somehow you can get away with some stuff when you're talking on the press by exogenizing politics and making things about Islam as opposed to the political realities on the ground.